Well, with us now to discuss all of this, former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland, former advisor to ex-Republican House Speaker John Boehner, and Deputy Chief of Staff to former Representative Adam Kinzinger, Maura Gillespie, CNN political analyst and PBS NewsHour White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez, and CNN senior political analyst and anchor John Avlon. I want to start as the legal beagle at the table. When you look at what actually came out in the 45 pages, you worked on the January 6th committee. You know the narrative, it's still jarring to read it. But from a legal perspective, when you look at this case, how strong do you think it is?
This is strong. It's very strong. And when we talk about a speaking indictment, which we discussed previously with the prior indictment, this lays out a narrative that is very descriptive. It explains who and what and where. In other words, what was said to certain people. Vice President Pence, he is somebody who's critical to this case. He's an incredible witness for the prosecution. So it's all laid out pretty straightforward, and it's not about whether or not something can be admitted into evidence because there's a confidentiality issue or something like that. There's not going to be as many legal conundrums and legal issues and hurdles to overcome. It's much more straightforward, and I think it's very, very strong.
6 co-conspirators in here, unindicted, as far as we know. Why is that significant?
This, again, it tells that narrative. And we know that those 6 people, and very likely I would expect, would be ultimately indicted later on. They're not indicted now because we know that the government solely wants to make this confined to President Trump and not have any other sideshows and not any other distractions.
You're looking at them on your screen. They include, let's pull them up again, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Sidney Powell. So you've got 3 attorneys there, Jeffrey Clark, Kenneth Chesebro, another attorney, and 1 political consultant. We don't know the name yet. Those people were so central to furthering this.
They were not just central, they were in part of it in many places. And the things that they said and did, and I go back to Pence again, and you have those conversations with Pence in reference to, you're too honest, I think was one of the quotes that was said. I mean, these are damning things. And, Pence is not in trouble, but when we think of Giuliani, we think of Eastman, those folks, Sidney Powell, those folks have bigger issues and real issues that I think will come after this indictment is dealt with.
The question is about cooperation, though, too, potentially,
to
be unindicted so far.
Yeah, but I don't know if those folks are cooperating. I don't know if I jump to that and assume that they are. They could be, but I don't know if it would be like that. I wouldn't expect a superseding indictment involving them and bringing them into the picture. I think that would be separate later on. But cooperation, I'm not so sure.
Maura, the January 6th committee, the final report, what they put together was so extensive and had so much detail in it, a lot of detail that people had not learned beforehand. When you look at this indictment, what stood out as new to you, given the ground that committee covered?
The involvement of Mike Pence. I mean, truly, what he brings to this is pretty astounding and enlightening for things that we did not get at the committee. Obviously, some of these conversations, some of these contemporaneous notes we were talking about, these are not things that were presented to the committee. And, especially, too, with Mark Meadows, right? He only gave us X number of things, and then he stopped cooperating. So not having the full cooperation of some of these key characters has really, I think, amplified what Jack Smith has done.
Can we walk through some of those
Sure.
people there? So there were 3 about Mike Pence that stood out to me through reading the indictment. For example, a phone call. Right. Pence calls the president on Christmas. This is after he's lost the election. Wish him Merry Christmas. And then the significance of what Trump does and says to him jumping right into the election.
Right. That stood out to me, but also, only the president was talking to Mike Pence, trying to convince him again, which we did know he was trying to convince him to, change the results of the election as soon as he got up there.
And explicitly telling his White House counsel to stop talking to Mike Pence.
Stop talking,
because
right.
he was talking to Mike Pence
and then
alone.
Even that conversation where Mike Pence says to the president, even your counsel says that this is not going to stand up. And he goes, I like the other idea better. To me, that's pretty damning and pretty jarring. But I also think that, just again, his involvement, because he has to, because this is the DOJ, really does shed new light that the January 6th committee just was not able to get.
John, when you read through this, what kind of stood out to you?
I mean, look, first of all, you're too honest to Mike Pence, both a character reference and a campaign slogan potentially for him. And the fact that the evidence shows that Trump again and again was confronted with the fact that he lost. And therefore, the argument that he didn't know or believed selected folks doesn't carry water, fundamentally. I was also struck by the fact that John Eastman, when raised by the Deputy White House counsel the possibility of riots in American cities if they tried to overthrow an election on the basis of no facts, said, well, that's why we have the Insurrection Act, basically inviting or suggesting that the American military could be used against the American people. That's chilling stuff, seen with any sense of perspective.
Talk about the historic nature of this. And the word, we use it often. This is different, is it not, than the other indictments so far? And what may be to come in Georgia. This is different.
It is different. And Jack Smith says it right there in the indictment. I mean, he says that this gets this was an attack on a process that was foundational to U.S. democracy. He says that it targeted a bedrock, quote, bedrock foundation of U.S. Of the government function, which is this not just the certification process, but essentially all along the way, the collection of votes, people's right to vote. The fact that the president is also being charged under a conspiracy to violate people's rights to vote and have their vote counted, something that is a rarely used statute and that we know was originally used against Ku Klux Klan
Civil rights
members
issues,
and
that's
civil
right.
rights issues. I think that all speaks to what you're talking about, Poppy, which is the really fundamental threat to democracy.
To Laura's point, I think it's so interesting because Jack Smith didn't have to come out and speak last night. He didn't have to give that short statement, but he did. And he called it unprecedented. And then he lauded the heroes that day on January 6th. I want people to listen to what Trump's attorney told Caitlin last night, presenting a defense, saying, you know, everyone has a First Amendment right. By the way, it's not an unlimited right, we should note. Here he was.
Mr. Trump had the advice of counsel, Mr. Eastman, who was one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the United States, giving him advice and guidance.
There is a difference between your First Amendment right that has to be controlled and blanket. I mean, I don't want to minimize, but you don't yell fire in a crowded theater. We've heard this before. This is far graver than that, maybe not in terms of the physical immediate sense, although one could argue it was, but in a much larger sense. And it's his intent and how he's using those words and his actions combined with that makes this such a dangerous, damaging thing that he did. So just to say you have a First Amendment right is simply unfair and inaccurate.
Everyone, stay with us. We have a lot more to get through. Donald Trump trying to use these indictments to his political advantage, to his fundraising advantage. We'll get more on that. And also what his rivals in the GOP for 2024 said.